Welcome to the International Entrepreneurship and Investor Conference, coming to you live from the International Convention Centre here in Durban, KwaZulu-Natal. We're talking about the drivers of growth across the African continent, and we're now moving to the challenges. Bame, if you can elaborate on what you deem to be the major challenges when it comes to creating winning strategies for African countries.
Absolutely, Bronwyn. I think a key challenge is for countries to be able to demonstrate that they're going to be growing over an enduring period and sustainably. And that challenge really falls on governments to be able to continue to reform and continue to provide an ever-improving environment for growth. I think one of the lessons to be learned from the much talk about BRIC slowdown is about the need to continually shift and reform. For example, China going from export-driven and fixed investment-driven to domestic spending-driven, or India needing to reform even more than it already has. So I think a key challenge is to demonstrate that there's long-term thinking around improving the growth environment. That includes investing in infrastructure for the long term in a way that's going to be encouraging to investment. It means investing in people, particularly in education, and providing the talent that is going to be able to act upon the opportunities and grow the businesses that we all foresee. It also involves ever increasing management of the macroeconomy, governance, transparency, and so forth. So I think that's a major challenge that governments have got to demonstrate that they're dealing with, so that people can see that they can invest in each of these countries and regions long term.
Are we seeing that long-term thinking? Chris Hart again alluded to it earlier in our opening session, that is so crucial, as Bame says, to attracting foreign direct investment. People need to know that they can invest for the long term.
Yes, I think it depends. It depends because those countries that have resources tend to suffer from the resource curse. We've got copper, we've got oil, we've got diamonds. We don't have to do anything else. Everybody wants to come here. Everybody needs this resource, and that's the focus. But I think that beyond that, we also have to fight this challenge of a civil service that is not a servant of the people. A civil service that's dictatorial, that's prescriptive, that doesn't offer management but wants to offer control, that is not facilitating but is prescriptive. And in many countries, these are the big challenges. But I think there are also discussions that we have to enter into. Economic and social development go side by side. And the challenges that we have in a country like Zambia is deciding what kind of infrastructure is purely economic and what kind of infrastructure has a socio-economic aspect to it. And in my opinion, I think that it's about a domestic strategy. For far too long, we haven't had the opportunity to sit down as countries and say, what do we want and how do we want to get there? There's always somebody from some donor, some cooperating partner institution that's sitting at the table and saying, forget what you want to do, this is how it's done in Brazil, this is how it's done in China. And I think that discussion needs to come well after we've got a domestic idea and agenda of where we want to go and how we want to get there. And I think those are the biggest hurdles that we have in Africa.
Roddy, can you pick up on Yusuf's conversation there, and perhaps still staying with the challenges that you deem to hold on the continent?
I think that, to pick up on that last point, it's important, I think, for governments to be open-minded to ideas, to be flexible, to learn the lessons of mistakes that other countries have made. We've seen examples of some countries where, if you take local participation rules, for instance, the need to have a local shareholder in any investment company. Some governments have approached it in a very it's a black and white way. They said this is the legislation. You take Zimbabwe, the indigenization legislation all companies must be 51% owned. Other companies other countries rather have taken a more flexible route and said, okay, well, let's look at what we're trying to achieve here. What we're trying to achieve is international investment. Yes, we would like our local population to benefit from that investment, but how do we get the best benefit for them? Making an international company give away 51% doesn't always achieve the best result. And for instance, I mean, we've talked about Ghana. Ghana is a prime example of a government who've looked at regimes or approaches that have been adopted in other countries and said, actually, no, we need to be more flexible about, you know, the kind of regime we impose. And instead of having prescriptive legislation, what they tend to do is when a new investor comes in, they talk to that investor about their plans, they talk about the employment they're going to create, and they come up with a scheme which they think is a balance between the international investors' concerns and providing benefit for the local economy, employment for the local population, and as a sustainable investment. So I think being open to new ideas is very important.
Perhaps we can now just touch on another point, because it's one thing attracting the capital, the FDI. It's quite another in terms of leveraging that correctly. And perhaps, MEC, I can get your thoughts on that, and then Bill, if you can follow. Are we seeing those economies that do get the FDI effectively using it?
Well, let me say that I think we are dealing with a challenge. Countries in the continent would probably have got different challenges that probably sometimes are unique to a particular country. But if I were to use an example of what many countries have to grapple with, the issue of the superstructure of the economy, the need for an economy to be open so that it can be able to compete, but to participate in the global economic system. And for that to happen, in many countries, you're required to have economic transformation. And I think it is at the core of the issue that has been raised around the whole question of empowering local citizens to participate in their own economic life, because if they don't, in the long term, that is the biggest threat that can ever happen to any economy, to any investor. Because if citizens of a particular country feel they are bystanders in the growth and the development of their own economy and they have no practical role to play, that can become the biggest danger to any outsider investor. But in dealing with that matter, we need to take a very responsible approach. But they have got lessons. For instance, if you take the Malaysian approach to the whole issue of indigenization and how they've handled it, and there are many other countries in the world that have done that. I think, therefore, the issue is, in our context, is that as countries who are dealing with the superstructure of the economy, how to actually open and transform the economy to allow participation of many people in that economy. Secondly, how to actually open up in an economic environment like ours, where we have corporatized the economy, and therefore to allow space for your small to medium-sized micro enterprises, for them to thrive and grow so that we can create more employment, so we can ensure that many people also are able to participate in the mainstream of the economy. Those are types of challenges. In the third area, for instance, which I think is important around the challenges in the continent, of course, is the whole question of infrastructure. There is an uneven growth in the continent as we speak right now, to such an extent that it is not possible for countries to trade with one another. It is easier, as I think Chris Hart was saying earlier, for countries to trade with countries outside of our own continent than trading with countries in the continent. And the issues there are about issues of connectivity, issues of logistics, issues of infrastructure. And I think it is these kind of issues that we are now beginning to see a very keen interest emerging in the continent to begin to deal with these issues of infrastructure so that we can be able to allow this kind of natural doing business between countries in the continent to become much more easier, to become much more better. As for the FDIs, I think we must say that we would always welcome that. And we welcome that FDIs, when they come into the continent, what they're doing an exceptional good job. However, we also want to ensure that there has to be the natural sharing of the economic spoils. If you take, for instance, what has happened in some other countries, i.e. in Angola, in the area of investment, we have seen companies that are coming from the Eastern Bloc, in Asian countries, who are just coming there, building everything in terms of local content, of sourcing of local content, and zilch and nothing. And I think those are types of things that we think we would not encourage in the continent. We want to encourage a collective participatory process in developing the continent, where there is also sourcing of the local content within the continent. In that regard, you can see a greater multiplier effect that takes place in the economy. It is those type of approaches that we in KZN would want to encourage people of KwaZulu-Natal to also, and businesses to also go into the continent, but go into the continent with a positive approach to say we will also be encouraging joint ventures, we'll be taking equity participation with nationals of those countries in the continent, because in that regard, we are reducing the risk even for our own companies.
Bill, can I get your input on that front?
Yeah, I want to step back just a bit and tell a quick anecdote. I remember we were starting to look at the growth in Africa, and we ran a press search in Chinese around the Sudan. The Sudan was really growing. And interestingly, the press search showed that 99% of the comments were about the business opportunity in the Sudan as well as in Africa. We ran that in the West, and we kind of had the opposite. It was about human rights, all of the issues associated. That was 4 or 5 years ago. And it's interesting how it's changed quite dramatically since then. And in fact, if you look at the returns on FDIs, today, Africa has the highest returns of any region in the world. It's by a little bit, but it is the highest returns. As a consequence, it is attracting significant investment. That said, we recently ran a survey where we asked about 1,500 companies what were the biggest barriers to growth from their perspective. The top two tend to come up as macroeconomic stability, inflation, et cetera, political stability, but right underneath that is infrastructure as well as talent and skills. I think increasingly you're seeing African governments smarter about how they're structuring deals with foreign investment, particularly around infrastructure, so we're making progress. But a lot more investment is going to be required to resolve particularly the infrastructure and the skills issue as we go forward.
One thing that we haven't touched on is the entrepreneur, the heart of today's conference, and the fact that when you speak to many economists, the strength and might of the Chinese economy and the US economy vests with the entrepreneur, appreciating the entrepreneur and helping the entrepreneur grow. Are we seeing anything of that sort happening on the continent? Do I have any takers, or are we going to have some? There we go, Yusuf.
Yeah, if you've lived as long as I have, you will have seen that for me, when I look at Zambia, back in the day, in the 1960s, the African business person was selling sweet potatoes on a sack, an empty maize bag outside a shop in the poor areas. And each decade we've seen our people move a step up, to the extent where now in Zambia, economic activity, about 80 to 90% of economic activity is in the hands of Zambians. But that's not the figures that we're looking at. The mining companies are holding 80% of the exports. So that's 4 or 5 companies dealing with the biggest resources in the country. But the challenge we have now in a lot of Africa, and the same thing with Zambia, is that everybody's trying to get a master's. Everybody's trying to get a bachelor's and a PhD. And nobody is running industry. And that's a challenge that we have. If we're going to have entrepreneurs, we need to train our people, to skill our people to be able to actually make money and build the economy. And that's the big challenge that we have in the developing economy, where we have to go back and re-engineer our education system to make it more relevant to development.
Bame, you'd like to add your voice?
Absolutely, Bronwyn. I think just like talked about FDI and how we can encourage FDI by providing more of an enabling environment for FDI, I think it's a very similar issue with respect to entrepreneurship. I think one of the greatest limitations to entrepreneurship in the continent is the fact that the ecosystem to enable entrepreneurships to thrive and to be able to have the confidence in taking that risk doesn't always exist. I think that some of the things that we should be encouraging more of is, for example, encouraging financial institutions, banks and so forth to be able to lend to small businesses and incentivizing them or requiring them to do so. I think all types of legislation that relate to businesses need to be tiered to allow small businesses to thrive and become competitive, including in terms of labor and costs associated with hiring people. I think that as long as we focus on improving the enabling environment, the ecosystem, then we'll have many more Africans looking to get into the entrepreneurship game. But the current systems and ecosystem are not very conducive.
Bongi, and a comment from yourself and from the MEC, just in terms of whether this enabling environment is a reality. Your thoughts, and then MEC, if you can follow.
It is a reality. But in most instances, there's a gap. There's a plethora of funds and institutions that government always put out to encourage entrepreneurs to take that leap. But there seems to be a gap in information and understanding of the business world, because how those funds are set up, how they are utilized when they are utilized, you find that sometimes they are not successful, sometimes it takes a very long time before they are fully used. And on the entrepreneurship side, there's also, particularly in South Africa, there is no shortage of funding. But there's always this gap between what's available in the banks, the risk that is attached to the endeavors that the entrepreneurs want to put in place, and how an activity can take place and mature in a space that would mean that there's a yield and there's a return on what has been put on the table. And I believe that entrepreneurship among Africans is really high. It's always been in a space of maximizing the opportunities, particularly for exports and for intra-African trade, where we've seen a very big gap.
MEC, before we turn to the audience, let's get your thoughts.
Well, for me, let me make a distinction. I make a distinction between a business person and an entrepreneur. A business person may be someone who has the best ideas of how to make money, but may not necessarily be the best entrepreneur in terms of stimulating the productive side of the economy. I think what we need more is not people who are going to be saying, I'm smarter in getting money, you can get money out of the public sector, you can get money out of the private sector, but I think we also need people who are going to be saying, we really want to be actually out there, come up with the best business model idea, turn it into a business model, be there, see it work. And we have seen examples of those people who have done that in the world. And I think what we want to encourage in the context of KwaZulu-Natal is to really have people who are going to be there, nurture and grow businesses, lead them, and focus. That's why we even encourage family-oriented business. Particularly if you talk about South Africans of Indian descent, they've been very good in coming up with highly innovative strategies of developing entrepreneurship with regard to family-owned businesses. And I think this is an area where we're looking for. And therefore, the take that we are making as government is that using the three things that government has, being an enabler as government, playing a role as a catalyst, but also being the role of a regulatory role and a regulatory authority, we must therefore create space for entrepreneurs to emerge, and therefore at times we must enable that environment, at times we must play a role of a catalyst to ensure that entrepreneurs are able to get the space, at times we must actually be able to look at the regulatory framework, to what extent it is able to promote and help entrepreneurs to emerge and to grow and to flourish. But my final thought would be that As Bong has indicated, if you look at what we have created, we do have access to capital in terms of resources in the context of KwaZulu-Natal, in the context of South Africa. But we also need, comparable to that, brilliant business models and business ideas that are sustainable, not something that is going to actually emerge today, tomorrow it has gone down to the dust. And I think those are types of things that we need, and therefore the skills, the kind of incubation resources that goes into that, and the empowerment process that goes to that are highly important, particularly for historically disadvantaged South Africans. I think that is an area where we also have to focus as government, but of course working with people. We need innovation and creativity at that space.
Innovation and creativity. If at that point we can open to the audience, do we have any burning questions? Thank you very much. If we can deploy mics and then take those questions from the audience. Thank you very much. If you can go ahead, sir.
Good day to you. My name is Ndumiso Mwabe. I run a company called Bars Equipped. We're a mobile bar services company. Ms. Bongi said that there's an array of funds available to us entrepreneurs. And Mr. Bankulu just said we need innovative ideas and sustainable businesses. Now, where are these funds? Where's the information for us to actually gain access to these funds? I mean, I run a mobile bar company, and someone doesn't know what a mobile bar company is. And I've done my research, and this is a sustainable business, but for my business to go to the next level, I need the funds. So how do I access these funds? Thank you.
A mobile bar company. Any keen investors, Bame? Are you looking to take some of the cash you've got?
That doesn't necessarily, fit the profile of what we're going to be investing in. But I think the audience member just does raise a very important question of information and access. And clearly, he's doing his research. He's connected and online, and is having trouble, finding the right access. And we've heard from Bongi and from the MEC that a lot of these funds are actually out there. So I think this all goes to the ecosystem issue that I referred to earlier, of having whether it's incubation centers, having events where entrepreneurs can meet with funders, having more of an ecosystem where this conversation can happen, so that knowledge and exchange of ideas and information is out there. Otherwise, people have great ideas and cannot act on them.
Can I come in before so that I can add on this
Yes,
point? We did in a work that was done by us. We have appointed a team that is called the Specialist Investment Team in KwaZulu-Natal. After the president had announced the 9 billion rand job creation job funds, we felt that it was important to have a resource that can advise some of the project promoters in this province freely. But in the process, we were able also to identify that in the study that was done, there are more than 106 different sources of funding that are available in this country. And I think it would be opportune, because part of the thing of being an entrepreneur is that you also have to understand that if I am in this line of business, where I am likely, who are the possible funders that can be able to do that. But from the Department of Economic Development and Tourism in KwaZulu-Natal, we have a specialist investment team that advises for free for people who want to access some of this fund, like your jobs fund of 9 billion, your GROW scheme of 10 billion, and the 5.75 billion in manufacturing enhancement competitiveness fund with DTI. Now, I'm saying we're not only looking for those, but there's also capital available in the commercial space. And we think people must also be able to access that. But from the small to medium-sized market enterprises of the department, we can advise.
Can I take another question? Ma'am, if you'd like to stand and state your name, please.
My name is Oriana Honeywell. I have a project called the Tegela Project. It's for the medical tourism. I'm going to read what I'd like to ask the MEC. What he said to me today, or what he's talking about, has excited me. May I read it?
Yes, you may. If you can keep it brief, 30 seconds.
Honorable MEC, if one has a multi-million rand project that supports your vision of entrepreneurship spirit, job creation, rural development, and it will also empower women, youth, and rural community. How do you suggest we get this project to fruition, as it will also put KZN on the map through tourism sector? Thank you.
I just want to be cognizant that I've got 3 minutes till the end of the broadcast, so MEC, we will continue asking questions beyond the broadcast, so we will answer your questions. MEC.
Well, let me say that I'm familiar with the project that my dear sister is actually referring to. We are currently having the team of the specialist investment team that is working with the project promoters who have put an application with the Development Bank of Southern Africa through the Jobs Fund, and we understand that there are technical issues that the Jobs Fund is looking at, and from where we stand, we think it is a great project. But of course, the project will have to speak for itself on the basis of the business plan, on the basis of the return on investment, on the basis of the net present values, all of those issues which are the investment decision that any person who is actually coming to fund the project will look at. Those issues are being looked at, but from a government point of view, we're quite excited about the project.
We've got one more question, time for one more question. You've got a mic? Who's got the mic? Please go ahead. A short question. I've got 1 minute till end of show.
Thank you, Program Director. My name is Musa Feka from ECDA Contractor Development Association. What I would like to stress regarding the economy of our country, if we can focus on continuous engagement of opportunities to develop skills, we can go far better in our economy. At the moment, we have a booming economy in South Africa, which is not benefiting the local communities. We need to work on that as a country. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think on that concluding statement, we're going to go to the end of our broadcast. You've been joining us here at the International Entrepreneurship and Investor Conference KwaZulu-Natal, coming to you live from the International Convention Center here in Durban, KwaZulu-Natal. Thanks so much for joining us.